Jordan thought he knew the weight of loss. He thought he had buried the past alongside the love of his life. But when he found a newborn abandoned on Sherry's grave, bearing her unmistakable features, he realized that some goodbyes are built on lies. Chasing a truth no one wanted uncovered, Jordan would face a conspiracy far more twisted than grief. Stay until the end, because when the final secret comes to light, you'll question how deep loyalty can cut. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. Jordan crouched in front of Sherry's grave, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the rough stone. "I'm not giving up on you," he whispered. The moment cracked open something inside him. A sharp movement caught his eye. He turned just in time to glimpse a woman at the far edge of the cemetery, her silhouette eerily familiar. "Sherry!" he gasped, surging to his feet. He stumbled over uneven ground, sprinting after the figure. His lungs burned as he closed the distance, but she vanished behind the mausoleums before he could catch up. Panting, Jordan stood there, staring into the empty rows of graves, his mind reeling. He wasn't crazy. He knew what he saw. Fighting the chill crawling up his spine, Jordan marched back to his car, unlocking it with shaking hands. As he drove away, a single thought drilled into his brain. If she was alive, someone had lied to him. And if they lied about that, what else were they hiding? Without bothering to go home, Jordan turned his car toward the edge of town, to a small diner he hadn't visited in years. He needed someone who wouldn't dismiss him as delusional, someone who owed him loyalty deeper than skepticism. Derek. He dialed the number while speeding through the empty streets. "Pick up, come on," he muttered. On the third ring, Derek answered, groggy but alerting at the tension in Jordan's voice. "Meet me at Eddie's diner. Now, it's about Sherry," Jordan said, giving no further explanation. Derek didn't argue, just hung up. With a terse, "On my way." Jordan arrived first, sitting in a booth near the window, drumming his fingers against the cracked vinyl seat. His nerves were razor-sharp, adrenaline giving him a sick edge of anticipation. The clock above the counter ticked loudly. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then the door creaked open, and Derek walked in, eyes scanning until they landed on him. Derek slid into the booth without a word, his expression tense. "Talk to me," he demanded, leaning forward. Jordan launched into his account, describing every moment with ruthless precision, the sighting, the resemblance, the gut feeling he couldn't ignore. Derek listened without interruption, his jaw tightening at key points. "You're sure it wasn't just your mind playing tricks on you?" he finally asked. Jordan's fist hit the table with a sharp thud, drawing a glance from the waitress. "I know what I saw," Jordan snapped, keeping his voice low. Derek raised both hands in surrender, his face serious. "All right, suppose you're right. Suppose she's alive. That means one thing, someone staged her death. But why? And more importantly, how deep does this go?" Jordan swallowed hard, the gravity of it sinking deeper into his bones. "We find out together." They spent the next hour sketching a rough plan, fueled by cheap coffee and the gnawing sense that time was against them. Derek suggested starting with the death certificate. "If there's a forgery, it'll be there," he reasoned. Jordan nodded. "And the hospital? I want to know who signed off on her body, who said it was her." They decided to visit the hospital records office first thing in the morning. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Derek clapped Jordan on the shoulder. "Stay sharp. If someone went to all this trouble, they won't want you digging around." Jordan nodded grimly. "Let them try." He drove home with his mind ablaze. The image of the woman near the grave burned into his memory like a brand. Sleep eluded him. Even when he closed his eyes, he saw her face, half-turned, slipping away into the shadows. Morning came brutal and uninvited. Jordan met Derek in the hospital parking lot, both men dressed casually to avoid suspicion. Derek adjusted a baseball cap low over his eyes. "Ready?" he asked. Jordan merely nodded, and they walked through the automatic doors together. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Nurses and Patients hurried past, but Jordan's focus was a laser locked on the records department sign. They approached the counter where a distracted receptionist sat tapping on her computer. Derek took the lead. "Hi, we're here to request a copy of Sherry Dalton's records," he said smoothly. The receptionist frowned. "You need proof of relation." Derek flashed a fake letter they'd prepared, posing as family members requesting documents for a memorial service. She hesitated, glanced around, then sighed. "Fine, give me a minute." Jordan's heart hammered against his ribs as they waited, every second stretching unbearably long. After what felt like an eternity, the woman returned with a thick manila envelope. Derek signed a fake name on the receipt and handed it over. They didn't breathe easy until they were back in Jordan's car, windows rolled up. Jordan ripped the envelope open. Papers spilling out between them. They rifled through medical charts, mortuary logs, and official death certifications. Then Jordan froze, fingers trembling. "Derek, look at this." The time of death listed on Sherry's certificate conflicted with the hospital's emergency room log. According to the ER log, Sherry had never been admitted. "This doesn't make sense," Derek muttered, snatching another sheet. "They issued a death certificate without her even being processed through the ER?" Jordan's stomach twisted violently. Someone had fabricated part of the official record. There was no doubt now. Whatever happened to Sherry hadn't been an accident, and it hadn't been natural. Fueled by a new surge of urgency, Jordan insisted they track down the doctor listed as the certifying physician. They found his name, Dr. Philip Renner, listed under the emergency staff. "I'm betting he's not going to be easy to reach," Derek said grimly. They started with public databases, finding an old address on the outskirts of town. Driving there, Jordan's mind buzzed with possibilities. Was Dr. Renner involved willingly, or had he been coerced? Would he even be alive to answer their questions? As they pulled into a crumbling cul-de-sac lined with battered mailboxes, a bad feeling settled in Jordan's gut. The house matching Renner's address looked abandoned. Paint peeled from the siding, windows gaped open like missing teeth. Derek killed the engine, and they both sat in silence, watching the house. Something was off, very off. Jordan reached for the glove box, retrieving a flashlight and a small crowbar. Derek mirrored the motion, slipping a compact pistol from under his jacket. No words were exchanged. The silent agreement was clear. They approached the front door carefully, boots crunching on the gravel. Jordan tried the knob. It gave way with an unsettling creak. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and decay. Furniture was overturned, cabinets ransacked. On the living room wall, something caught Jordan's eye. A message scrawled in red paint, or something worse. "You're next." Derek swore under his breath, scanning the room with his weapon raised. It didn't look like Dr. Renner had simply moved away. It looked like he'd been erased. Jordan stared at the bundle resting atop the grave, his chest tightening painfully. For a moment, he thought it was some kind of cruel illusion. But as he stepped closer, his heart plummeted. It was a newborn, wrapped in a thin pink blanket. The tiny body shifted slightly, a weak cry escaping its lips. Jordan knelt down, his hands hovering uncertainly before he dared to lift the infant into his arms. The baby's face was turned towards him now, and the sight made him stagger back a step. The delicate features, the shape of the nose, the curve of the mouth, even the fine line of the eyebrows were so achingly familiar. They mirrored Sherry's face with a precision that stole the air from his lungs. Trembling, Jordan pulled the blanket tighter around the child, instinctively shielding it. His mind raced in circles. Who had left the baby here? Why? And why did the child look so unmistakably like her? His eyes darted around the cemetery, searching for whoever could have abandoned the infant, but there was no one, only graves and endless rows of silence. Hugging the baby close to his chest, Jordan made one decision. He couldn't leave this child behind without allowing doubt. To creep in, Jordan rushed back to his car, carefully fastening the baby into the front seat, using a jacket to cushion and secure the tiny body. He fumbled with the keys, heart hammering, before pulling out of the cemetery parking lot. His first instinct was to call Derek, but something held him back. Derek was a cop. Official channels would mean questions he wasn't ready to answer yet, legal complications he wasn't prepared to face. Jordan needed someone he could trust completely, someone outside the system. Tommy, a doctor, an old friend, and someone who owed Jordan more favors than he could ever repay. Gripping the steering wheel with one hand and checking on the baby with the other, Jordan veered onto the main road, heading toward Tommy's private clinic on the outskirts of town. He rehearsed what he would say, but no explanation made sense even to himself. "You'll help me, figure. You'll help me." "This out," he muttered, glancing down at the baby's sleeping face, feeling a surge of fierce protectiveness he hadn't expected. Arriving at the back entrance of Tommy's clinic, Jordan parked hastily and scooped the infant into his arms. The building was dark except for a single light in the office. "Window." He pounded on the door with the side of his fist until Tommy appeared, his hair disheveled and a scowl on his face. "Jordan? What the hell?" Tommy's words died in his throat as he spotted the baby. Whose kid is that?" he demanded, stepping aside to let them in. Jordan brushed past him, urgency stripping away any attempt at calm. "I don't know," he said flatly. "I found her in the cemetery, on Sherry's grave." Tommy stared at him as if he had grown two heads. "You found a baby on a grave? Are you even hearing yourself?" Jordan's jaw clenched. "I'm telling you what happened. I need your help, Tommy. I need you to run a DNA test. Compare her to me." Tommy opened his mouth, closed it, then sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Tommy led them into a small examination room, motioning for Jordan to lay the baby on the padded table. Jordan did so, reluctantly, keeping one hand lightly on the child's chest, as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. Tommy fetched a kit from a cabinet and returned with a swab and a collection tube. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" he asked, looking Jordan dead in the eyes. "Once we start, there's no turning back." Jordan nodded grimly. "I need to know." Tommy approached the baby carefully, swabbing the inside of her tiny cheek before repeating the process on Jordan. He sealed both samples and placed them into a secure container. "I'll rush this through my private lab, but it'll still take a few hours," Tommy said. Jordan barely heard him. His attention was locked on the infant, who was now sleeping peacefully, unaware of the turmoil she had unleashed just by existing. Every instinct in Jordan screamed that this child was connected to Sherry. He just didn't know how yet, or why. While Tommy busied himself processing the samples, Jordan wandered aimlessly around the office, memories crashing into him. He remembered the nursery he and Sherry had decorated with such excitement, the crib that remained untouched, the mobile that never turned above a sleeping baby, the tiny onesies, still folded neatly in drawers. Grief twisted in his gut, sharper than ever. They had been robbed of all of it, and now here was this child, appearing like a ghost from a future they had never lived. Was it even possible that Sherry had somehow survived and given birth? Or was this baby another cruel manipulation designed to torture him further? Jordan didn't know which thought was worse. All he knew was that he was already attached. He hadn't realized it until he saw the baby's tiny hand curl around his finger, but now that he had, there was no walking away. Whatever answers came, whatever darkness they uncovered, he would not abandon her. Hours later, Tommy returned, holding an envelope so tightly that his knuckles were white. Jordan stood up instantly, reading the heaviness in his friend's posture. "Just tell me," Jordan demanded. Tommy hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "The results are clear. There's a 99.9% probability that you're the biological father." Jordan staggered back, his mind short-circuiting. "That's not possible," he croaked. "Sherry died before the baby could be born. She wasn't even close to full term." Tommy's face was grim. "I ran it twice. Same result. Jordan, this baby is yours." Jordan shook his head, the room tilting around him. None of it made sense. Unless Sherry hadn't really died. unless someone had stolen her, hidden her away, and faked everything. The walls he had spent months building around his grief crumbled in an instant. "Then where is Sherry?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Tommy placed a firm hand on Jordan's shoulder, grounding him. "I don't know, but this changes everything," he said. Jordan sank heavily into a chair, cradling his head in his hands. His mind spun with possibilities, each one darker than the last. If someone had gone to these lengths, staging deaths, forging documents, abandoning a newborn in a cemetery, what kind of enemy were they really dealing with, and why? Tommy crouched in front of him, forcing Jordan to meet his eyes. "You can't go public with this yet. Whoever did, this might still be watching, waiting." Jordan nodded mutely. Rage and fear churned together inside him, boiling under the surface. He wouldn't sit back. He wouldn't wait for answers to fall into his lap. He had a daughter now, and whoever had tried to keep her hidden from him was about to find out exactly how far Jordan was willing to go. Jordan left Tommy's clinic just before dawn, the baby bundled securely in his arms. He didn't head home. He couldn't. Home was no longer safe. Instead, he drove aimlessly through side streets, mapping out a mental plan. First, he would need supplies, diapers, formula, clothes. He made a list automatically, his brain operating on survival mode. Second, he needed to dig deeper into Sherry's death. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate deception, and he was done accepting half-truths. He would tear apart every piece of evidence, interrogate every person involved, expose every lie. And third, he needed to protect the baby. She wasn't just a clue, she was his responsibility now. His daughter, his blood. Jordan adjusted the rearview mirror to glance at her sleeping form, a fierce determination hardening his features. They had tried to erase Sherry. They had tried to erase this child, but they had failed. Jordan wouldn't stop until he uncovered every last secret they had buried. Jordan stared at the lab report spread across the passenger seat, feeling the weight of finality clamp down on his chest. The words were there, in black and white. Paternity probability, 99.9%, leaving no room for doubts, no space for wishful thinking. His hands tightened around the steering wheel as if he could crush the impossible situation into something manageable. In the back seat, the baby stirred softly in her carrier, her small face a mirror image of Sherry's, both haunting and grounding him. Jordan exhaled sharply through his nose and grabbed his phone. He needed backup. Someone. Official. This wasn't just his problem anymore. A crime had been committed, lives manipulated. Dialing the non-emergency police line, he rehearsed the bare facts, forcing his voice into something calm and detached. When the dispatcher answered, Jordan's words tumbled out, a carefully structured account meant to trigger immediate action. Instead, the operator responded with lukewarm politeness, promising to send someone when available. Jordan hung up with a sick taste in his mouth, knowing instinctively that if he waited, nothing would happen. Hours crawled by without any officers. Arriving, Jordan paced the living room of the motel room he had rented, every muscle in his body coiled tight. The baby slept fitfully on the bed, surrounded by hastily bought supplies, diapers, formula bottles, tiny clothes he had grabbed from a 24-hour store. Jordan checked his phone, compulsively, but no calls, no messages, nothing. Finally, a knock sounded at the door. He opened it to find two uniformed officers, both wearing expressions that screamed indifference. "Mr. Dalton?" the taller one asked. Jordan nodded, stepping back to let them in. He laid everything out. The discovery at the grave, the baby's uncanny resemblance to Sherry, the paternity results. The officers exchanged skeptical glances that made Jordan's blood boil. "Sir, do you have any proof the baby was actually abandoned?" one asked. Jordan bristled. "What kind of question is that? She was left alone on a grave." The officers scribbled a few notes, asked a few more meaningless questions, then left with vague assurances they would file a report. Jordan stood there staring at the closed door, realizing with gut-wrenching clarity that they didn't believe him, or worse, didn't care. Fuming, Jordan scooped up the baby and sat back down at the table littered with papers and evidence. He had thought that doing the right thing, contacting the authorities, would trigger some kind of righteous machinery, that the system would sweep in and demand answers. Instead, he was more alone than ever, and clutching a child he hadn't known existed until yesterday, navigating a labyrinth of lies with no official help. He stared down at the baby, her tiny chest rising and falling, her fragile existence depending entirely on him. "I'm not going to let them brush this under the rug," he said aloud, his voice shaking with the effort to stay composed. He pulled out his laptop and began cross-referencing every name, every hospital staff member listed in Sherry's death records. If the police wouldn't investigate, he would. He would tear apart every document, interrogate every inconsistency, expose every person who had touched this cover-up, because that's what it was. No other explanation fit. Somewhere, someone knew the truth about Sherry, and they had gambled everything that Jordan would never find it. The hours bled into each other as Jordan worked, piecing together a timeline that only raised more questions. The gaps were too convenient, the paperwork too clean. No autopsy report was attached to Sherry's file, just a signed death certificate and a hospital discharge record that didn't match her supposed time of death. Jordan leaned back in the chair, rubbing his burning eyes. He thought of all the nights he had sat in the half-finished nursery, talking to Sherry's photo, believing he had lost everything. And now he realized he had been grieving a lie. Someone had stolen not just his future, but his right to even question it. He turned his attention back to the files, focusing on the attending physician's name, Dr. Philip Renner. His gut twisted, remembering the abandoned house they had found listed under Renner's name. Whatever had happened to the doctor, Jordan was sure it was connected. He would dig deeper into Renner's past, find colleagues, friends, even family if he had to. Someone would talk, someone had to. Caring for the baby during those sleepless nights became Jordan's new reality. Bottle feedings, diaper changes, endless lullabies whispered with clumsy affection. It should have felt alien, but it didn't. Instead, every small act cemented his determination. This child was his link to Sherry, a living testament that she had fought, had survived long enough to bring their daughter into the world. Jordan decided to name her Hope, because that was what she represented. Even amid the wreckage of lies and betrayal, he wrote the name carefully on a slip of paper and placed it inside her diaper bag, a silent promise that he would protect her no matter what. As he rocked her to sleep, his mind plotted the next moves, securing a false identity to shield her from prying eyes, assembling allies he could trust, and preparing for whatever storm he would inevitably unleash. They had tried to erase his family, but Jordan was alive and he was done playing defensively. The more Jordan uncovered, the more the conspiracy unfurled before him. A nurse listed as having signed off on Sherry's admittance was no longer employed by the hospital. Her file conveniently marked as resigned voluntarily. A second staff member, supposedly present during Sherry's final moments, was out of the country according to customs records. The coincidences stacked too neatly to be ignored. Jordan filled notebook after notebook with names, dates, and connections, creating a wall of information that slowly started to reveal patterns, money trails leading to shadow corporations, inconsistencies in death records from other patients treated at the same hospital during the same month. Too many anomalies to dismiss as mistakes. Jordan realized with a sick jolt that Sherry might not have been the only victim. Whatever operation had swallowed her up was bigger than a single woman's death. He wasn't fighting one or two corrupt officials. He was waging war against an entire machine. On the third night of digging, Jordan's frustration reached a boiling point. He slammed his fist onto the table, sending a stack of papers flying. Hope stirred but didn't wake, a testament to how exhausted she was. Jordan closed his eyes, trying to center himself. Panic would only get them killed. He needed to be smart. He needed proof that couldn't be denied. Something so solid that even the corrupt authorities wouldn't be able to sweep it aside. He made a decision then. He would go back to the hospital, not as a grieving husband seeking answers, but as a man with nothing left to lose. He would find the original security footage from the night Sherry supposedly died, and he would force the truth into the light. Grabbing his car keys and slinging the diaper bag over his shoulder, Jordan leaned over the sleeping baby and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'll be back," he whispered. "I swear." And with that, he stepped into the night, a man, transformed by grief, rage, and the unbreakable bond of blood. Jordan handed the crumpled note to his mother, his hands tight with tension. Sharon adjusted her glasses, reading the shaky handwriting aloud. "If you love me, find the place where it all began. Trust no one but blood." Her voice faltered slightly, and she glanced at her son. The weight of what this meant dawning in her eyes. Jordan didn't waste time explaining. He grabbed the diaper bag, checked Hope's seatbelt again, and motioned for Sharon to follow him. They left the cramped motel room behind without another word. Hours later, after a relentless drive into the heart of North Carolina's backcountry, Jordan turned the car into a long gravel driveway. At its end loomed a sprawling mansion, the ancestral home of Sherry's family. Jordan's stomach twisted. He had visited this place only once, years ago, and even then, the coldness from the family had been palpable. Now, the house seemed more like a fortress than a home. Sharon gave him a sidelong glance, but said nothing as they approached the heavy oak doors. Jordan knocked hard, his heart racing. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a butler with unreadable eyes. "We're here to see Mrs. Hawthorne," Jordan said, tightly, referring to Sherry's estranged mother. The butler hesitated, his eyes flickering to Hope in Jordan's arms before stepping aside without a word. Jordan and Sharon exchanged a look, but entered, moving cautiously through the grand foyer. The house smelled of old wood and polish, a scent that stirred unease deep in Jordan's chest. Massive portraits stared down at them from the walls, silent witnesses to decades of hidden histories. As they waited, the muffled sound of footsteps approached, and from around a corner, Meredith Hawthorne emerged. She looked almost exactly as Jordan. Remembered, regal, severe, her lips pressed into a permanent line of disapproval. Her gaze swept over Jordan, Sharon, and finally Hope, lingering a fraction too long. "Jordan," she said coolly, "to what do we owe the unexpected visit?" Jordan tightened his grip on Hope. "We need to talk about Sherry." The flicker in Meredith's eyes was almost imperceptible, but Jordan caught it, and it fueled the fire already burning inside him. Meredith led them into a sitting room, as cold and unwelcoming as her demeanor. Heavy curtains blocked the daylight, and towering bookshelves closed in around them, making the space feel more like a cell than a sanctuary. Jordan stayed standing, refusing the silent offer of a seat. Hope stirred in his arms, letting out a small whimper. Sharon moved closer, instinctively protective. "We found a note," Jordan began, keeping his voice steady. "In Sherry's, a handwriting. It led us here." Meredith's face remained composed, but her fingers twitched ever so slightly against the armrest of her chair. "I don't know what you expect to find," she said coolly. "Sherry's death was tragic, but digging into the past will only bring pain." Jordan's eyes darkened. "Pain is all I have left," he snapped. "Tell me what happened to her." Meredith shook her head slowly. "You're chasing ghosts," she said. "There's nothing for you here." Jordan didn't believe her for a second. He shifted Hope to one arm and stepped forward. "Then you won't mind if I look around." Meredith's lips parted slightly, a rare crack in her armor, but she recovered quickly. "This is a private residence, not a public investigation," she said icily. Sharon spoke up for the first time, her voice sharp. "If you have nothing to hide, why act like you do?" The question hung between them. like a guillotine. Meredith stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "You may look," she said finally, "but you'll find nothing." She waved to the butler, who reappeared stone-faced. "Show them around. Indulge their fantasy." Jordan knew it was a trap of some kind, but he nodded. He wasn't leaving until he had scoured every inch of this mausoleum. As they moved deeper into the house, Jordan noticed how the servants watched them. Furtive glances, quick whispers, fear, the kind that came from long-buried truths, scratching their way back to the surface. He tightened his jaw. Whatever secrets this house held, they were not going to stay buried for much longer. The butler led them through endless hallways lined with portraits and relics of wealth, now faded into an oppressive gloom. Jordan noted locked doors, heavy locks that seemed out of place in a family home. "What's behind there?" he demanded, pointing to one such door. The butler hesitated. "Storage rooms. Old things," he answered without meeting Jordan's eyes. Jordan didn't believe that either. Every instinct he had screamed that something vital was hidden behind those doors. He bided his time, memorizing the layout, noting which keys jingled on the butler's belt. Upstairs, the air grew thicker, as if the weight of years pressed down harder with each step. They passed Sherry's old bedroom, still preserved like a shrine, untouched by time or grief. Jordan stood in the doorway, heart hammering, absorbing the evidence of a life interrupted. A half-finished painting sat on the easel by the window, a picture of a baby, eyes wide, reaching outward. Jordan swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. Hope cooed softly against his shoulder, and he felt Sharon's steadying hand on his back. Jordan's anger solidified into something sharper, something cold and calculated. When the tour ended and the butler prepared to dismiss them, Jordan said, "We're not leaving yet." Sharon backed him immediately. "We deserve answers," she said firmly. Meredith reappeared in the doorway, her mouth twisting into a mocking smile. "Stay as long as you like," she said. "The past won't change." Jordan ignored her. That note, written in Sherry's desperate hand, had led him here for a reason. Somewhere inside these walls was the missing piece of the puzzle. He handed Hope carefully to Sharon, then turned back toward the main corridor. He had noticed something earlier, a panel that didn't sit flush with the wall, a seam barely visible beneath a tapestry. Jordan moved toward it now with deliberate steps, peeling back the heavy fabric. Beneath it was a small, almost invisible keyhole. He turned to the butler, who froze in place. "Open it," Jordan ordered. When the man didn't move, Jordan advanced on him, fists clenched. Now, cornered, the butler reluctantly unclipped a key from his belt and approached the hidden door. With trembling hands, he inserted the key and twisted. A click echoed in the silence, and the door swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Jordan didn't hesitate. Grabbing a flashlight from a nearby drawer, he motioned for Sharon to stay behind with Hope and started down the stairs. The butler remained at the top, unwilling to follow. Each step Jordan took felt heavier than the last, the air growing colder and the smell of old stone stronger. At the bottom, he found himself in a small, windowless room. Files and boxes were stacked against the walls. Dust motes swirled in the beam of his flashlight. Jordan rifled through the papers, his pulse pounding in his ears. Medical records, birth certificates, legal documents, altered, falsified, and at the very back, he found what he had feared and hoped for. Proof that Sherry had been alive after the date listed on her death certificate. Proof that someone had hidden her existence and the existence of their child from the world. Jordan gathered everything he could carry, stuffing documents into his jacket and pockets. As he climbed back up the narrow stairs, the weight of the truth bore down on him, heavier than any burden he had ever carried. Sharon looked up as he emerged, her eyes questioning. He shook his head once, a silent message to hold her questions until they were safely away from prying ears. Meredith watched from the shadows of the hallway, her face pale and furious. Jordan met her gaze, his own expression unreadable. "We're leaving," he said. Sharon clutched Hope tighter, and together they walked out of the Hawthorne mansion without a backward glance. Jordan's mind churned with the implications of what he had found. This wasn't just about Sherry anymore. This was about an entire legacy built on lies, and he was going to tear it down brick by brick. As they drove away from the estate, Jordan allowed himself a single glance in the rearview mirror, where the dark silhouette of the mansion shrank into the distance. The battle was just beginning, and he would not rest until he unearthed every secret hidden behind those cold, rotting walls. Jordan slammed the car door shut with more force than necessary, clutching the files hidden inside his jacket. Sharon secured Hope in the back seat but paused, sensing the storm brewing within her son. "What now?" she asked cautiously. Jordan's jaw tightened. "Now we confront them head on," he said. On. There was no more time for quiet investigation or subtle questioning. He marched back toward the imposing front doors of the Hawthorne mansion with Sharon right behind him, cradling Hope protectively. Without knocking, Jordan pushed the doors open and stormed inside. The butler scrambled to block his path, but Jordan brushed past him with sheer force of will. Within seconds, the commotion drew Gerald and Thelma Hawthorne into the main hall. Gerald's confident, polished exterior cracked slightly when he saw Jordan's expression. Thelma clutched her pearls, her mouth parting in a gasp she quickly disguised as a cough. Jordan didn't give them time to regain composure. "We know everything," he said sharply. "You've lied about Sherry, you've hidden her, and now you're going to tell me where she is." For the first time, real panic flickered across Gerald's face before he masked it behind a smug smile. Gerald stepped forward with the air of a man used to controlling the room, but Jordan wasn't a boy anymore, and he wasn't afraid. "You're delusional," Gerald said, his voice dripping with disdain. "My daughter is dead. Your grief has clearly broken your mind." Jordan took 2 quick strides forward, closing the space between them, the files clenched tightly in his hand. He thrust them at Gerald. "Explain these then," he snapped. Gerald's hand hesitated for a fraction of a second before snatching the documents away. His eyes skimmed the contents faster than Jordan thought possible, but the slight tremor in his fingers betrayed him. Thelma moved to Gerald's side, peering at the pages with growing horror. Sharon watched silently, standing a few feet behind, her maternal instincts on high alert. Hope let out a small whimper, but Sharon soothed her quickly, unwilling to break the tense tableau unfolding. "This doesn't prove anything," Thelma said, voice brittle. Jordan's gaze sharpened. "It proves enough, and if you don't start talking, I'll take this to every news station in the state." As if summoned by the rising tension, a loud thump echoed from deep within the house. Jordan's head snapped toward the sound instantly. Gerald and Thelma both froze, their faces draining of color. The butler, standing awkwardly by the entrance, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Jordan didn't miss the silent message passing between Gerald and Thelma, a look steeped in dread and calculation. Without hesitation, Jordan turned and ran in the direction of the noise, ignoring Gerald's shout behind him. He barreled down the hallways, past the opulent sitting rooms and cavernous libraries, his heart hammering for reasons far beyond adrenaline. Somewhere beyond these sterile walls, Sherry was alive. He could feel it in his bones. Sharon, clutching Hope tightly, stayed behind, understanding that Jordan's fight would be more dangerous with a child in tow. Jordan followed the trail of hastily closed doors and scuff marks on the polished floor, each clue driving him faster until he reached a narrow service corridor he hadn't noticed before. At the far end of the corridor, a heavy door slammed shut. Jordan sprinted, his boots pounding against the hardwood, and threw his weight against the door. It gave way with a loud crack, revealing a dim, cluttered passage. In the center of the hallway, being half dragged and half carried by 2 burly men, was Sherry. For a second, the world narrowed to a pinprick of light as their eyes met. Sherry's mouth opened slightly, recognition and raw emotion flashing across her bruised face. Jordan, she gasped so faintly he almost missed it. Then one of the men jerked her roughly, and she disappeared through another door. Rage exploded inside Jordan, burning hotter than anything he had ever felt before. He chased after them, but the door slammed and locked before he could reach it. He pounded his fists against the barrier, roaring her name. Inside, muffled shouts and thuds sounded, struggles he couldn't see but could hear with excruciating clarity. Every fiber of his being screamed to tear the house apart piece by piece until he had her safely back in his arms. Jordan slammed his shoulder into the door again and again, feeling the wood crack under the strain, but it refused to break. Behind him, hurried footsteps approached, Gerald and two other men, one of whom Jordan recognized as the family's longtime lawyer. "Stand down, Jordan," Gerald barked. "You're only making this worse for everyone." Jordan spun around, eyes wild. "You kidnapped her," he shouted. "You lied to everyone. You buried her alive in this goddamn mausoleum of yours." Gerald's face twisted into a mask of rage. "You know nothing of what you're interfering with," he spat. "You'll destroy everything." Jordan advanced on him, fists clenched. "Good!" he roared. "It all deserves to burn." For a split second, it looked like Gerald would hit him, but instead, the older man recoiled, gesturing sharply to his guards. Jordan knew he was about to be overpowered, but he didn't care. Every second that passed was another second Sherry was trapped, suffering because of their greed and lies. Two guards lunged at Jordan. He fought back viciously, landing a solid punch on one before being tackled by the other. His elbow connected with someone's nose. He heard the wet crunch, but didn't pause. Fists and knees flew, bodies slammed into, slammed. Walls, furniture toppled over in the scuffle. Jordan fought like a man possessed, driven by a desperation that made pain meaningless. He caught a glimpse of Sharon in the distance, standing protectively over Hope, her face a mask of terror and fury. That image gave Jordan the strength to throw off one of the guards, sending him crashing into an antique sideboard. Blood streamed from a cut above Jordan's eye, but he barely felt it. He lunged again toward the door where Sherry had disappeared, but Gerald barked another order, and this time 4 men grabbed Jordan, forcing him down. "Take him! Out!" Gerald snarled, his face purple with rage. Jordan struggled violently, but he was outnumbered. He caught one last glimpse of the locked door before something hard slammed into the side of his head, plunging him into darkness. Jordan awoke some time later, his wrists bound behind his back, and his mouth dry with the metallic taste of blood. He was in one of the sitting rooms, slumped against a gilded chair like a broken doll. Gerald stood over him, arms crossed, radiating fury. Thelma hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "You forced our hand," Gerald said coldly. "You don't understand the consequences of your actions. You're meddling in matters that reach far beyond you or Sherry." Jordan lifted his head, defiance blazing in his bloodshot eyes. "You can't bury the truth forever," he rasped. "You think because you have money and power you're untouchable. You're not." Gerald's mouth curled into a sneer. "We'll see about that." He turned on his heel and stalked out, leaving Jordan alone with his rage, his injuries, and the unbreakable knowledge that Sherry was alive, and he was closer than ever to bringing her home. Sharon gripped the burner phone she had hidden in Hope's diaper bag, her fingers shaking but determined. She stepped into a small alcove out of view and dialed the emergency number. When the dispatcher answered, Sharon spoke quickly and clearly, giving the address of the Hawthorne estate and stating there was an active kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. The weight of her words pressed into every syllable. When she returned to the sitting room where Jordan lay battered and bound, she gave him a single meaningful nod. Help was on the way. Gerald, still pacing furiously across the room, didn't notice. He barked into his own phone, summoning more of his men to clean up the situation. Sharon's heart pounded, but she stayed by Hope, rocking her gently, whispering reassurances to keep the baby calm. Minutes later, the front door was flung open with a bang, and armed officers flooded the mansion. Gerald spun around, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You can't come in here without a warrant," he thundered. The lead officer held up a document. "We have probable cause," he said coldly, motioning his men forward. Gerald's mouth snapped shut, fury trembling in every line of his body. The scene spiraled fast. Jordan was freed first, Sharon running to his side, while officers spread out through the house. Gerald, realizing the gravity of the situation, immediately tried to change tactics. He called out to one of the senior officers by name, an old acquaintance, and pulled him aside, speaking in a low voice. Jordan, now on his feet, watched the exchange, feeling the sick churn of anger in his gut. Money would be Gerald's first weapon. It always had been. He saw Gerald slip something into the officer's hand. Sleek, paper-thin, bribe money. Jordan's fists clenched. But to his astonishment, the officer froze, staring at the offer with thinly veiled disgust. In front of his team, he shoved the money back at Gerald's chest. "You're under investigation, Mr. Hawthorne. Any attempt to interfere will only make it worse." Gerald's face twisted, disbelief battling fury. The illusion of his invincibility had cracked, and everyone in the room could see it. Jordan stepped forward, pulling the DNA test results from his jacket and thrusting them at the officer. "You want proof?" he said, voice shaking with restrained rage. "Start here." The officer scanned the document. Briefly, his face hardening with every second, he nodded to his men, who moved in swiftly. Gerald struggled, shouting about lawyers, about rights, but the clink of handcuffs shutting around his wrists drowned him out. Jordan felt the sick, sharp satisfaction of justice beginning to take shape, but he didn't allow himself to celebrate yet. Thelma stood frozen by the grand staircase, her face pale and stricken. Sharon, holding Hope close, glared at the woman who had been complicit in their pain. One of the officers turned toward Thelma, asking her to step forward. She didn't move at first, staring into nothing, her hands trembling. "You can make this easier," the officer said gently but firmly. "The truth, Mrs. Hawthorne, all of it." Thelma's lower lip quivered. Jordan caught the moment her carefully constructed world crumbled, the moment guilt finally overwhelmed denial. With a broken sob, Thelma stepped down the stairs, her voice cracking. "We lied," she whispered. "We lied about everything." Her confession poured out in a torrent as the officers recorded every word. Thelma described how they had kept Sherry hidden after her supposed death, drugged and isolated. They had convinced her Jordan had died in a car accident, faked news reports, falsified obituaries. Sherry, devastated and vulnerable, had been manipulated into compliance. When she had tried to fight back, Gerald had used more brutal methods, employing private security to keep her under surveillance and control. The baby, Hope, had been born during that captivity. Gerald had intended to raise her as his heir, a twisted extension of his control over Sherry. Thelma wept openly as she recounted these horrors, her words finally cutting through the dense fog of lies that had suffocated their family for years. Jordan listened, each revelation landing like a hammer against his chest. He saw Sharon clutch Hope tighter, heard the disbelief and rage rippling through the officers as they took in the full magnitude of the Hawthorne's crimes. No amount of money or power could shield them now. At the mention of Sherry's location, Jordan surged forward. "Where is she now?" he demanded, his voice a raw growl. Thelma crumpled against the banister, her hands covering her face. One of the guards, now cooperating under threat of arrest, spoke up quickly, giving directions to a hidden wing of the estate. Jordan didn't wait for permission. He sprinted through the hallways he had memorized, fueled by adrenaline and something deeper, something primal. He found the hidden door, practically tearing it from its hinges. Inside was a stark room with a single narrow bed and no windows. Sitting there, chained at the ankle like a prisoner, was Sherry. Her head snapped up at the noise, confusion clouding her features until recognition shattered through it. "Jordan," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Without thinking, Jordan rushed to her, breaking the lock with the key thrust into his hand by one of the Officers. Sherry collapsed into his arms, sobbing. He held her tight, feeling the frantic beat of her heart against his chest. "I'm here," he whispered fiercely. "I've got you. No one's going to hurt you ever again." Behind them, the chaos continued. Officers called for ambulances, more patrol, units, and social services. Sharon appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, still cradling hope. When Sherry saw the baby, she let out a sound that was part cry, part laugh. Jordan helped her to her feet, supporting her trembling body. Sharon placed Hope carefully into Sherry's arms. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Sherry stared down at her daughter, wonder and grief battling in her shattered heart. "She's ours," Jordan said, his voice rough. Sherry kissed the baby's forehead, tears falling freely. I thought I'd lost everything," she whispered. Jordan cupped her face gently. "You didn't lose me," he said. "They tried, but they couldn't break us." The three of them stood there, framed in the battered doorway, a family reforged through fire and betrayal. The battle wasn't over. Recovery would take time, and wounds deeper than the flesh would need to heal. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Jordan believed in something he thought he had lost. Hope was alive, in his arms, in Sherry's eyes, in every breath they took together as free people once more. As officers led Gerald and Thelma away in handcuffs, their screams and threats faded into the background. Sharon, standing beside Jordan and Sherry, wiped her tears and allowed herself a weary smile. Justice had taken its first breath, and although it had come at an unbearable cost, it had finally arrived. Jordan squeezed Sherry's hand, silently promising her that no matter how dark the road ahead might be, they would walk it together. Holding Hope tightly between them, they turned away from the ruins of the Hawthorne estate and stepped into the future that had been stolen from them, and now, against all odds, reclaimed. "Tell me everything," Jordan demanded, standing in the stark interview room across from the broken shell of Gerald Hawthorne. Gerald sat slumped in the metal chair, his hands cuffed to the table, his once imposing figure now sagging with the weight of his exposed crimes. His lips pressed into a tight, bloodless line, refusing to speak. Jordan slammed a folder onto the table, sending a scatter of falsified documents across the surface. Sherry's forged death certificate, the tampered hospital records, the faked obituary. "You wanted to control everything," Jordan growled. "Even life and your death, even your own daughter." Gerald flinched but said nothing. A detective in the corner cleared his throat and leaned forward. "You can make this easier on yourself, Mr. Hawthorne," he said in a voice sharp enough to cut steel. "Start talking." Gerald's gaze drifted down to the evidence against him, and something inside him finally cracked. His shoulders sagged even lower, and in a voice raspier than Jordan remembered, he began to confess. "You never belonged," Gerald hissed, the words oozing with venom even as his voice shook. "You were an outsider. You tainted her." Jordan clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white, but he forced himself to stay still, to listen. "I built this family's legacy with my own hands," Gerald continued. "I wasn't going to watch it be destroyed because my daughter fell in love with someone like you." His voice faltered, the hate barely masking his shame. Jordan's stomach twisted, hearing the open declaration of prejudice, the real reason for the nightmare they had all endured. "So you faked her death?" Jordan spat, unable to contain himself. Gerald nodded weakly. "We bribed the doctors, paid off officials. We needed to erase you, erase the mistake." He coughed harshly, a sound almost like a laugh. "It was supposed to be clean, quick. She was never meant to fight so hard." The detective silently recorded everything, but Jordan only saw red, the magnitude of Gerald's cruelty burning into every cell of his body. Sherry's trembling hands clutched Jordan's tightly when he returned to her side and told her everything. Her face crumbled with the weight of the truth, but she didn't cry. Not yet. It was as if she had known, deep down, that something this vile had to be behind her endless nightmare. She described the years, locked in dark rooms with barred windows, where medication blurred her mind and guards ensured her compliance. The flashbacks came in jagged, painful fragments. Cold meals shoved through a slot in the door, whispered lies that Jordan had died and that the world outside was too dangerous for her and the baby she was forced to carry in isolation. Sherry spoke in a hollow voice, as if narrating someone else's horror. Jordan listened, his heart breaking again and again, vowing silently that she would never know a single moment of fear under his watch again. Sharon sat nearby, holding Hope tightly. Against her chest, her face carved from stone. Not even years would erase the scars left by Gerald's tyranny. At trial, the courtroom was packed, the air thick with a tension no verdict could fully dispel. Gerald sat shackled between two federal marshals, his once proud shoulders stooped and defeated. The evidence laid bare before the jury left no room for sympathy. Each falsified record was presented methodically: the fake death certificate, the ghost signatures on medical reports, the forged letters of condolence sent to Jordan after Sherry's death. One by one, the foundation of Gerald's lies crumbled publicly, and with each piece, the grandeur of the Hawthorne name was reduced to ash. The prosecutors played taped confessions where Gerald admitted manipulating Sherry's perception of reality, controlling every aspect of her existence like a sadistic puppeteer. The gallery gasped when the forged obituary was shown side by side, with official records proving Jordan was very much alive during the supposed accident. And when Sherry herself took the stand, her voice calm but unyielding, she sealed Gerald's fate. The jury didn't deliberate for long. Guilty on all counts: kidnapping, fraud, psychological abuse, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The judge's sentence was swift and merciless, delivering decades of prison time. But it wasn't just the loss of freedom that broke Gerald. It was the humiliation, the irreversible ruination of his legacy, the exposure of the rot he had tried to bury under layers of wealth and privilege. As the sentence was read, Gerald didn't cry or plead. He simply sat there, hollowed out, his entire life's work reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in contempt. Thelma, though given a lighter sentence for her eventual cooperation, avoided Jordan's gaze throughout the proceedings, her guilt drowning her more effectively than any prison ever could. When it was over, Jordan and Sherry stood together outside the courthouse, hope cradled between them, the sun on their faces for the first time in what felt like lifetimes. Sherry's healing began slowly. Nightmares still plagued her, and some days the world outside felt too bright, too loud, too overwhelming. But she fought, step by step, to reclaim herself. Jordan stayed by her side through it all. At doctor's appointments, therapy sessions, sleepless nights when she woke, gasping and disoriented. Hope's laughter filled their small rented home, chasing away shadows with every giggle. Sharon visited daily, her once worried eyes softening as she saw her family rebuild itself from ashes. They celebrated Hope's first birthday, quietly, with a simple cake and a promise: the past would never define them. Jordan knew scars would remain. Some wounds don't vanish, they simply become part of the story. But he also knew love, real, fierce, indestructible, was stronger than any chain Gerald had ever tried to forge. And Sherry, battered but unbroken, was proof of that. Jordan sometimes wondered what would have happened if he hadn't gone to the grave that day, if he had just accepted Sherry's death as the world demanded he should. The thought chilled him more than any nightmare. Hope's small hand curled around his finger whenever doubt crept in, grounding him in the present. Their lives were stitched with pain, but also with survival, with defiance, with victories earned inch by painful inch. Jordan and Sherry rebuilt their world brick by brick, every moment of freedom sweeter for the price paid. The Hawthorne mansion, abandoned now and left to rot, stood as a grim monument to the hubris that tried to destroy them. But it no longer held power over their lives. They had walked through hell and emerged not as victims, but as survivors. The monsters had fallen, their chains had shattered, and now nothing and no one could ever cage them again. Sherry leaned against the doorframe of the nursery, watching as Jordan carefully assembled the final piece of the mint green crib. His fingers moved methodically, tightening screws, adjusting edges, ensuring that every part was solid, safe, ready. Hope giggled from her playpen in the corner, babbling nonsense words that made Sherry's heart swell with an emotion too large to name. She hugged herself, taking a deep breath. This wasn't the life they had been promised before everything was stolen, but it was theirs now, hard-won and all the more precious for it. When Jordan finished, he stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans, turning to her with a tired but genuine smile. "That's the last of it," he said. Sherry crossed the room and pressed herself against him, their bodies fitting together with a familiarity that even years of separation hadn't erased. "You made it perfect," she whispered against his chest. Jordan rested his chin lightly atop her head. "It's not about perfect," he murmured. "It's about ours." And standing there in the small sunlit room painted with hope, Sherry believed him. The courthouse steps felt different this time, no longer a place of confrontation, but a place of closure. The official recognition of Hope as Jordan's biological daughter had passed through the courts without contest, bolstered by overwhelming evidence and the mountain of crimes exposed at the Hawthorne trial. Sherry had clutched Jordan's hand so tightly during the hearing that her knuckles had turned white, but she hadn't let go even once. The final decree, read aloud in a dry monotone by the judge, had nearly broken her composure. Hope Eleanor Dalton, legally and irrevocably theirs. Afterward, outside in the bright sunlight, Jordan lifted Hope into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing freely. Sharon had snapped photos, tears streaming down her face, and Sherry had hugged her mother-in-law fiercely, whispering thank yous into her hair. For the first time, it felt as though they had stepped out from under a crushing shadow, breathing air that was clean, untainted by fear or grief. They were a family again, not the one they had planned, but the one they had fought to reclaim. Back in Virginia, life unfolded slowly, but meaningfully. They rented a modest house on the edge of town, its wooden porch slightly crooked, its garden a wild tangle of promise. Sherry chose mint green again for Hope's room, a quiet homage to the dreams they had once dared to have and had now stubbornly resurrected. Sharon moved into the neighboring property, becoming a constant, stabilizing presence. Mornings were filled with the scent of fresh coffee and the patter of tiny feet. Afternoons meant trips to the park, chasing Hope's squeals of laughter across the grass. Evenings were soft with the ritual of storybooks and lullabies, Jordan's low voice rumbling through the nursery, Sherry's fingers tracing circles on Hope's back as the baby drifted to sleep. There were hard days, too, nights when Sherry woke gasping, tangled in memories she couldn't always banish. But there was always Jordan's hand, steady and sure, pulling her back to now. They built their new life in layers, patient and deliberate, each small victory a brick in the foundation of a future they refused to let be stolen again. News of the federal investigation into the Hawthorne estate made headlines for weeks. Journalists camped outside the decaying gates, eager to chronicle the fall of a dynasty once revered for its philanthropy and business acumen. As agents combed through bank records, secret tunnels, and offshore accounts, the full extent of Gerald's corruption unraveled like a rotten tapestry. The property itself was seized, its treasures catalogued and redistributed, some to auction houses, others to museums, as relics of a cautionary tale about power, unchecked. Jordan watched the coverage only once, his expression unreadable, before turning off the television and focusing instead on Hope's delighted shrieks as she knocked over a tower of blocks. "The past can rot for all I care," he said quietly to Sherry, who simply nodded, threading her fingers through his. They had learned the hardest way that legacies built on lies collapse eventually. Better to build something honest, something flawed and real, from scratch. Better to teach hope about love and truth than dynasties and control. One afternoon, Sharon answered a knock at the door and found Thelma standing there, small and hesitant. The older woman looked nothing like the proud matriarch who had once glared down her nose at Jordan and Sherry. She seemed diminished, as if carrying an invisible yoke too heavy for her brittle frame. Sharon stood firm in the doorway, her arms crossed protectively, but Sherry, catching sight of her mother's old face over Sharon's shoulder, stepped forward. There was a long, aching silence before Thelma spoke, her voice fragile. "I know I have no right," she said, "but may I see her?" Sherry hesitated. Memories of betrayal, manipulation, and abandonment rose in a flood, but then she looked at Hope, who was toddling across the living room floor, innocent and unburdened, and she realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about refusing to be chained by it. With a tight nod, Sherry stepped aside. Thelma entered cautiously, falling to her knees when Hope toddled up and, curious, placed a hand on her wrinkled cheek. The sob that broke from Thelma's chest was raw and unguarded. Sherry looked away, her throat tight, but her heart lighter. Weeks passed, and the new rhythms of life became less tentative. Sherry took up painting again, her brushstrokes tentative at first, then bolder. Jordan returned to part-time carpentry, rebuilding homes with the same steady patience he used to rebuild their lives. Sharon volunteered at a local shelter, her heart too big to ever be idle. Hope grew, fast, too fast, moving from her first steps to her first words in a blur of wonder and exhaustion. Each new milestone was celebrated with simple, heartfelt joy. Messy cupcakes, photo albums stuffed with candids, long nights on the porch telling stories until the stars blinked awake overhead. They had no sprawling mansion, no grand legacy, but they had laughter, they had love, they had freedom, not the kind handed down by wealth, but the kind fought for, bled for, earned every single day. And in the end, that was more than enough. One evening, as Sherry rocked Hope to sleep in the mint green nursery, Jordan stood silently in the doorway, watching the soft creak of the chair, the low hum of Sherry's lullaby, the sight of their daughter's tiny hand clenching and unclenching against her mother's chest. It was all seared into his heart. He wasn't haunted by gravestones anymore. He didn't wake with the taste of loss on his tongue. He had found something stronger than grief. He had found home. Sherry caught him watching and smiled, a real unbroken smile. And in that moment, Jordan knew with absolute certainty that whatever else life might throw at them, they would face it together. He crossed the room, knelt beside her, and laid his head against Hope's tiny back, closing his eyes. For the first time in years, Jordan wasn't chasing shadows. He was holding his whole world in his arms. They were free, and they would stay free forever. We here at the channel put a lot of heart and dedication into creating each story, thinking carefully about every detail to truly touch your heart. If this story brought you any reflection or emotion, please share it with us in the comments. We truly love reading each message and feeling this special connection with you. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Your support means the world to us and helps our team continue bringing more inspiring and heartfelt stories. Thank you so much for being part of our community. We'll see you in the next video.